For free shipping on a bunch of the tools you'll see me using, use Foureyes at checkout on rockler.com. All right, I want to get right into what we're building with this one and the first thing that's going to make it special. So it's going to be a sideboard, hutch, credenza, buffet thing, basically the piece of furniture that you would put right by your dining table. So I know in that 2D drawing it looks pretty basic, but there's going to be a few details that are going to really make this thing pop. And the weirdest of them is going to be this reverse live edge detail that wraps around the entire piece. Now you might be asking yourself, what the is a reverse live edge? Understandable. So what I mean is, you know how normally a live edge goes along the outside of something? Well, here it's going to go along the inside. And then it's going to be joined to another piece of wood that has a lot of contrast. Now, the weird thing about that is that you can't use the actual live edge. You have to sort of mimic a live edge. And when you do that, things can go really wrong. Because if you don't cut the right fake live edge, you're going to create an uncanny valley. So if you've never heard of the uncanny valley, here's a 10-second crash course. Moving left to right on this graph, as something looks more like a real person, our emotional connection should increase. However, there's a dip in the graph right here called the uncanny valley, where despite something looking more realistic, we actually feel less connected emotionally. So the same thing is true with wood. On any slab with a live edge, the flow of the grain is going to follow the live edge. And if you try to just randomly cut a live edge that doesn't follow the grain, it's going to look off. It'll look like, I think the technical term is donkey balls. Okay, so with all that in mind, what I'm going to do here is mark a chalk line that'll first follow the natural grain, and second, remove all of this waning so that I have a nice flat edge that I can use to join to my contrasting wood. So I knew that I was going to need a really long, narrow slab for this project, and I picked out pretty much the longest, narrowest piece of black walnut that I could find on GL Veneer's website. But even it was still more than I needed, so I'm going to start off by ripping it right down the middle. That way I can save the rest for another project down the road. Okay, next we can start cutting our fake, but still pretty real, live edge. And this is the type of job that's perfect for a CNC, but it isn't necessary. So to do it without a CNC, what you would do is cut a line with either a bandsaw or a jigsaw. Just do your best to follow the line that you marked out, and then do some sanding to refine things. And then once you're happy with the look of that, you could mark a line on your contrasting wood and essentially shape and scribe the piece to fit. And you're going to see a trick that I'm going to use in a minute so that even if you were a little bit off while you were doing this, it's not going to be a big deal. Okay, so now you know what I'm trying to do, but I want to quickly zoom out and talk about why I'm doing this in the first place. So whenever I'm designing a piece, the first thing that I think about is if the shape is going to be simple or complex. And then I use that to kind of dictate how I'm going to move forward. And here's my basic philosophy, and I think this is a really good rule of thumb to follow. Simple shapes go with complex wood, and complex shapes go with simple wood. For example, something like this table, the Braille table, there's a lot going on there shape-wise, so I don't want to pair that with complex wood. I want to keep it simple or plain. But on something like the piece that we're building here, the shape is pretty simple. So it's a good opportunity to use the wood as the wow factor. I guess if you boil it down, when somebody looks at a piece, I want them to have one overwhelming thought. So with the Braille table, it's the shape, and with something like this piece, it's the wood. Okay, Exhibit A for why I am a fraud. Hang on, let me rephrase that. For why I have imposter syndrome. It's because of like this right here, where what I'm attempting to do is cut my maple so that it and the walnut can spoon, but instead I cut an exact mirror image of what I needed. So now they're, doing whatever the opposite of a spoon is, which I feel like the most common answer would probably be a fork, but a fork and a spoon are pretty similar. I feel like the opposite of a spoon should be, like a kangaroo. Whatever. Okay, getting back on track, and this is not me trying to be modest or humble or whatever. I would say that I am, at best, a pretty average woodworker. So that, coupled with the fact that I know that some people are watching these videos to learn, makes a bit of doubt creep in, and sometimes can make me feel like a bit of an imposter. Who am I to be teaching them? So what I do to combat that is lean pretty heavily on the places where I feel like I actually do have a competitive advantage. So first, I think I'm a pretty good designer. Definitely above average there. And second, I hate my family. which makes it much easier to work the 65 hours a week that I need to get ahead. I'm kidding. Sometimes I make jokes in these videos and people take me too seriously, so for the record, I'm kidding. But truthfully, average woodworker, good designer, hard worker who loves his family. But when it comes to anything spatial like you just saw there, I'm an idiot. So you know how some people who build stuff just go out and start cutting and fly by the seat of their pants, figure it out as they go? Not me. I'm literally incapable of doing that. So instead, I plan out everything meticulously. Like, look at this. That's one of probably 10 files that I have that I made for myself to get through this build. And I should clarify, I don't do this because I think it's the right way. I do it because it's the only way that I can get the job done. And I would say that the downside of that is that I'm a very slow builder. Like, I have to work those 65 hours in order to achieve what a normal person could in 40. But the upside is, our woodworking plans are the best. Period. And if you try one and it's not for you, we have a money-back guarantee. Look, I know that not everybody's interested in woodworking plans, but if you are, just give them a look, and no pressure. So the other day I had a buddy swing by the shop, and he was checking out this piece as I was working on it. And while we were chatting, he asked me, isn't that a waste of money, buying a whole slab and then only using half of it? Why not just use a regular board? And I replied with the answer that always leaves people feeling the most satisfied. Maybe. But it did get me thinking, could I have done this with just a regular board? So technically, yeah. Any board's going to have some sort of grain flow that you could cut along to get this look. But most of the time, it's going to be pretty subdued compared to a piece where you're getting the actual live edge. So then the question is, how much is it worth to get this less subdued look? Well, I crunched the numbers. Had I used a board of walnut, I would have needed about 22 board feet. And at $18 a board foot, that's about $400. Versus this slab, which was $900. So I guess the upfront cost is an extra $500. The thing is, I'm confident that I'll be able to put the other half of this slab to good use. So if you think about it like that, now the slab's only like an extra $50. And I also think that having this nicer looking wood will allow me to sell this piece for a little bit more money. Like, let's say that I can sell it for an extra $200. Now I'm basically being paid $150 to use it. So to my buddy who asked that question, was this a waste of money? Maybe. Okay, in all seriousness, I do think that the extra money is worth it in this instance. Spending a few hundred extra bucks or a few extra hours on something can suck in the moment, but I always look at this stuff and think, you know what, this is forever, so why not suffer a little bit now so that I can be a little bit happier for the rest of my life? Okay, so our 3 focal point panels are looking good, and the next thing I'm going to do is cut them to their finished width. And the crucial thing here is going to be making sure that these lines line up. If I mess that up, really, I'm doing more harm than good by trying this at all. So I'm going to really try to make sure that I nail this. Then before we start assembling anything, I'm going to cut in a couple of dados for the bottom shelf. So a kind of foolproof way to make sure that this comes out right is to clamp your panels together back to back and then cut both dados simultaneously, because this will remove any sort of human measuring error that I, the human, might introduce. And as I'm cutting these, I'm going to stop about 4 inches from the front edge. That way, when I eventually install the shelf, it'll give me a cleaner look. So with that looking good, next you would think that we can start assembling things, but we actually can't. And this is really important because we want to add in a few details right now. So here's my next design philosophy. Most people think about details as an afterthought, and they either don't do them at all or go way overboard. Like they finish building something and then they just throw a round over on every single sharp corner and call it a day. But really, you should use details sparingly and intentionally. Actually, Charles Eames, along with his wife Ray, who are known for these designs and a bunch more, once said, "The details are not the details, they make the design," which I think can be shortened to this. Great furniture designer, but not much of a wordsmith. I'm kidding, and I love my family. Anyway, here I'm going to be very intentional with the details that I include, and I need to do them in a very specific order to make my life easier. So remember, sparingly. There's only going to be 3 details. A large roundover that'll flow up the outside front vertical edge and perfectly match the radius on the top front corner. a small reveal that'll create a tiny separation between the panels, and a continuation of the dark epoxy line. That's it. And I think here's a good way to think about details. Details are the things that you kind of subconsciously notice before you consciously notice them. They give your piece character, but they don't smack you in the face. So like the live edge, that's not a detail, that's a focal point. And spoiler, I got some other really cool ones coming up. But to get back to details, I think really the key is just to take your time and think about them. And know that a little can go a long way. Like look at this. Here's a drawing of this piece that we're building without any focal points. But by introducing a few small details and things like varying panel thickness and how far they're set back from the front edge, it makes a huge difference. At least that's what I think. I mean, none of these are hard and fast rules. They're just things that I do and hopefully things that will help other people out. Okay, I'm going to keep taking care of those details. And like I said, we've got some really cool focal point stuff coming up. But I want to take a minute to give a huge thank you to Ethos for sponsoring this video. So people don't like to think about life insurance because it means thinking about
death.
Excuse me. Death. But ignoring it doesn't help and it actually hurts because the truth is, according to Investopedia, each year you wait as you get older, life insurance rates can increase by 8 to 10%. So I got a 20-year policy when I was in my mid-30s, and I think the smartest thing that you can do is get it when you're at your youngest, which obviously is going to be today, unless you got a time machine. And Ethos have made the entire process way simpler, faster, and more affordable to the point where you can get a quote in seconds and apply for life insurance in just minutes online without any medical exams. You just need to answer a few health questions. And most people are able to get coverage the same day. Plus the rates obviously are going to depend on you, your age, and what you're looking for. But you might be shocked by how affordable a policy can be. Stop putting it off. I did it so that I could protect the people most important to me. So take a minute, go to Ethos and get a free quote so you can get the ball rolling. All right. Thanks, Ethos. Okay. Exhibit B for why I have and should have a healthy dose of imposter syndrome. Do me a favor and look at this drawing. After our glue dries, this is where we're going to be. So the next step is going to be to add in our shelf and then a vertical partition. Now, let me ask you a question. Don't worry, it's an easy one. If the distance from here to here is 56.5 inches, and our shelf, complete with the tongues, needs to span that distance plus the additional ½ inch on each side where I cut the dados, how long should this piece be? That's right, 57.5 inches. Makes total sense. And this isn't my first rodeo, so this should have been really simple and straightforward for me. But oh, fans. Okay, yeah, that was stupid. My opening is 56.5 inches. I was supposed to cut my shelf to 56.5 plus 1, so pretty easy math there, 57.5. But being a moron, I cut it right to 56.5, so now it just slides right in. I think there's an easy fix though. I think what I can do is basically just cut a matching groove in the side of the shelf itself and then put basically like a floating tenon in there, essentially add the material back on and then use that to connect the two, and it should be just as strong as what it was going to be if it was one piece. It's just a little bit of extra work, but whatever. Dumb mistakes always happen. Doesn't matter how long you're doing this, they always happen, but you get better at dealing with them. Hopefully, we'll see. We'll see how I deal with this one. Okay, here I go. I f***ed up again. So normally when I do this, I cut the tongues onto the ends of the shelf and then trim it back from the front, and it fits into the cabinet, nice clean look. Well, here, because of the fix, I wasn't thinking about things. And now I put myself in a situation where you can see the notches from the front side of the shelf. Thankfully, I think I got another easy fix. Back when I had cut my shelf to size, I saved this offcut. So by the time I get it on there and everything's sanded, it should pretty much be invisible. And like I said, mistakes are gonna happen. It's all about how you deal with them. And the more experience you get, the better you get at dealing with them. Here, 2 mistakes in a row, but nothing that anybody's ever gonna notice, and what the hell are you doing here? I just came to say good luck. I appreciate that, but we're not gonna need it. Okay? Okay, let's do this right. No more mistakes. All right, so needless to say that things did not go great with installing that shelf panel. And next I actually have to install another one, a vertical partition, so basically the same thing rotated 90 degrees. And I will stake my career on this one. There is no effing way that I'm gonna mess this up. Honestly, if I do, I shouldn't even be woodworking. That said, there probably will be a time in like 3 months from now when it's not fresh anymore and I might mess it up again. So real quick, to future Chris, here are the 7 steps that you need to take to do this right. Step 1, measure your opening and write down the correct dimensions that your panel needs to be. And then this is the key part. Make sure you cut your panel to whatever dimensions you wrote down and not an inch shorter. Step 2, cut your shelf to length. Step 3, use your router table to cut tongues onto the ends of your panel that perfectly match your dado. In this case, they're 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. Step 4, rip your shelf to its final width. Step 5, measure how long you need to cut your tongues, and remember that cutting things to the correct length is key. By the way, brass chunky pencils are back in stock, but they'll probably sell out fast again. So act fast, link in the description if you want one. And also, by the way, 0.9mm lead. Step 6, cut the tongues. And step 7, install. All right, redemption and woodworking card maintained. Okay, the next potentially big focal point thing that we need to do are the drawer fronts. But there's one more kind of structural thing that I need to do first, and that's gonna be some sort of support for the lower shelf. So I plugged my numbers into this thing called the sagulator, which is a real thing. And it said that my dimensions loaded up with 60 pounds would be borderline. Now, I would guess that there probably isn't ever going to be 60 pounds on this shelf. And also the divider is going to provide some extra support. But I figured why not play it safe and add something to the underside. Plus it makes it look better. And to attach these, I'm going to go ahead and risk my woodworking card again by using pocket screws. At least that's what some people would say. And actually, I'll tell you what I tell those people. Nothing. I just let them think whatever. But what I'm thinking is, anybody who says that screws or pocket holes should absolutely never be used on nice furniture is an anachronistic gatekeeper. And I have the proof. This is a nice piece of furniture, and I'm going to use pocket screws where it's appropriate. So, I rest my case. One of my pet peeves is when a YouTuber asks for people to subscribe right at the beginning of their video. It's like, dude, I don't even know who you are yet. Stop immediately asking for something. Like, imagine showing up at the Olive Garden for a blind date, and before you even order mozzarella sticks, you ask your date for hand stuff under the plaid tablecloth. That's how ridiculous it is to me. Okay, maybe that's a little bit exaggerated, but you get what I'm saying. And I hope that you'll appreciate that I've been patient, but at the risk of being too forward, if you're enjoying this video and you'd be so kind, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe. And remember, in 5 months from now, if you regret this decision, you can always unsubscribe. It's legal in all 50 states. You might have noticed in that last shot that my drawers all of a sudden moved from the top to the bottom of the cabinet. And this was a very late stage pivot. Basically, as I was working on things, I just randomly tried them lower and I liked it more. But I thought that it might be recency bias. So I decided to do a quick poll to see if I was wrong. And you guys agreed. Pretty overwhelmingly. And I got a lot of the same 2 comments from people. And you're probably thinking one or the other of those things right now. So I'll address that in a minute, but the main reason that I'm telling you this now is that you're going to see some drawings coming up where the drawers are still up top, but all of the ideas remain the same. Okay, so drawer faces. The contrasting live edge of the case is still going to be the main focal point, but I would say that this is the other potential focal point. And I came up with a bunch of ideas, most of which were variations on the idea that I used for the record player console that I built a few months back, which was basically a kind of carved dish with a knob. But this little part of me felt like I was being fancy just to be fancy, and if I'm being honest, I actually preferred this simple circular recess. So I guess there's kind of 2 notes here. 1, sometimes less is more. And 2, whenever possible, give people a pleasant surprise. So what I mean by that is, this detail definitely doesn't smack you in the face by any means, but it is still probably the second thing that people will notice. And at first glance, it seems really unassuming, but they kind of make you ask a question. How do I use these? Well, here's how. The drawer faces are going to be 1 inch thick, and I'm going to drill a hole about 3/4 of an inch deep. And then I'm going to cut in a slot at the bottom so that when you stick your finger in it, there's a little lip that your finger can grab onto and open the drawer. Okay, now I'll admit that I know that's not the greatest surprise, but I think even a little something like this goes a long way. Probably a better example, not to sound like a broken record, was on that record player console where I put this little brass rod that serves as a sleeve stand. People love a simple surprise. Okay, now to actually do it. I'll start by cutting about 1/2 of an inch down using a Forstner bit, which is gonna leave this little dimple at the bottom. And it's really important that we end up here with a clean bottom, which I guess is true in woodworking and personal hygiene. Anyway, so I'm gonna switch to cut the rest with a router bit. Now, it's going to be really hard to sand in this little recess afterwards, so I'm actually going to clean the router bits that I'm using before I cut the bottom, just to make sure that I get the best result possible. And this is something that I probably should do more of. I mean, obviously, in an ideal world, you want your bits to be clean and sharp 100% of the time, but it's rare that it's actually crucial, though I would say that this is one of those times. Oh yeah, the 2 comments that I got from people on the poll. Actually, this one comment probably summed it up best. Thanks, Phil. Look. So most people commented that they preferred the drawers on bottom because they thought that the piece looked more visually balanced, which is why I liked it that way. But the people who preferred the drawers on top said that they liked it because they didn't want to have to bend over to use the drawers. So here's my thinking. These aren't everyday drawers. They're the kind of thing that you keep like the fancy silverware or the fancy napkins or I don't know, whatever else fancy people put in drawers that they only pull out twice a year for Thanksgiving or like an eyes wide shut party or whatever. The point is, it's a drawer that you're not going to use very often. So, you know how they say that form follows function? Well, that's a suggestion, not a rule. It's probably true 80% of the time, but just don't be afraid to deviate. Okay, I've been avoiding this, but I had a goof. And this is something that I 100% have to fix because it kind of ruins the project if I don't. So a few minutes back, you saw me adding a little epoxy detail on the edge of the top to continue the line. And if I could go back in time, I would change the way that I did this. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, on any piece of wood, you've got face grain, edge grain, and end grain. And end grain, unlike face and edge grain, is much more porous, like a sponge. And because of that, it kind of soaked up the dye and now it's faintly stained black. So if I could go back in time, there's actually an easy fix. Instead of using black dye, I should have used powder to tint the epoxy, which would not soak into the end grain. Can't go back, unfortunately, but I have a couple of ideas. So my first idea, I just did a little test and I actually abandoned it, so I don't even know why I'm telling you. But it was basically to remove about 1/4 inch of the maple end grain, except for a little like mitered tip that I would leave along the top. And then I could just cut a small piece and attach it. And the reason that I abandoned this is it kind of puts us back in that uncanny valley territory, especially when there's end grain on the walnut and then there's not on the maple. And actually I played around with the same idea, only making the little piece using end grain, but it was just really hard to get a clean cut. I think just end grain and precise miters on a little piece, they don't work. So that's a no-go. Anyway, so here's the idea that I think I'm gonna try. So I got a lot of pieces of maple just sitting around, a lot of offcuts, and it's basically impossible to find a perfect match on end grain, but I think I can probably find something that's pretty close. And then I think I can probably just chisel out the bad stuff and patch it. So I'd say that there's probably about a maybe 0.00001% chance that I'm gonna find a perfect match, but I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna go try it now. I'm gonna stop talking and I'll let future voiceover Chris tell you how it went. So wish me luck. Thanks on camera, Chris. So it went pretty good. Not perfect, not invisible. I'd prefer if no fix was needed, but it's fine. And I'm going to let you in on a dirty little secret. Let's pretend that you built this piece and it was sitting in your house. Well, the people who come over are going to fall into 3 groups when it comes to their opinion on your furniture. First, the largest group won't care or won't realize that you built it. And even if it somehow comes up, they're going to ask surface level questions like, is that oak? And move on. These people are never going to notice the fix. The next, much smaller group will think that it's mildly interesting that you build stuff. They'll likely ask questions more about you or building than the piece itself. How'd you get into woodworking? How long did it take to build? That kind of stuff. They might get closer to the piece, maybe even touch it, but most of them will never notice the fix either. And finally, the third and by far the smallest group will think that it's really cool that you built this. They'll ask lots of questions, and they're going to examine the piece. But even they might not notice the problem in the fix, except that as soon as they get close to it, you're going to panic, and you'll voluntarily point it out. And then ironically, the fix will become the focal point. But here's the good news. They'll actually view it as a positive. Wow, Greg's really a perfectionist. What a beautiful piece. And he even took the time to fix his mistake. You can barely even see it. In a weird way, making a mistake and then fixing it somehow elevated you in their mind beyond just not making a mistake in the first place. So the TLDR is 99% of people won't ever notice it, and the few who do will see it in a positive light. And that's why a fix like this is good enough. Unless you're trying to sell it, then you're f***ed. All right, we're on the home stretch here. And in these shots, you see me working on a back panel, and then the other thing I have to do is make a pair of shelves. And then we can sand, finish, and assemble everything. Okay, if you're still here, I've got some big news. So just to get right to it, and then I'll kind of backtrack and explain everything. But for the past many months, I've been working on a new finishing product. And it's been really hard to keep under wraps, but we're at like the 5-yard line now, so I feel like I can finally say something. Which I guess I just did. So the whole time that I've been making videos, by far the single biggest questions that I get have to do with finishing. And I have this hunch that everybody thinks that there's some magic formula out there that they're just unaware of. So first, I hate to burst your bubble, but there's not. That said, not all finishes are equal. And in the past 15 years that I've been woodworking, I found some that I didn't really care for, some that were all right, and some that I love. But I've never been 100% satisfied. Like I never found that one product that ticks every single box for me. So several months ago, I went on the hunt for somebody who could help me with this. And after a lot of conversations, eventually I found a chemist in Germany who was a fit. And that's when the work started. So my personal favorite products are hard oil finishes. And I've tried almost all of them. And a lot of them are great. I'm not going to name any by names, but you've probably heard of them. So my goal was that this finish needs to be as good or better in every category than my favorites. And I want it to use the best quality inputs possible. So if that meant that price needed to be a couple bucks more, then so be it. I want it to be the best for the user and for me. And after literally hundreds of samples, first getting to the formula and then testing it to dial everything in, I think we're there. Sample 73. That was the one. It had to be as or more protective than the most protective hard oil finishes, so that if people only want to use one coat, they can. It needed to be as easy to apply as the most easy to apply finishes, because I know that with some products it can be easy on large flat surfaces, but little nooks and crannies can be a pain. I wanted it to be as odorless as possible, and this one's a pet peeve, a better container. I want people to be able to get 99% of the finish actually out of the container. No more of this 15 to 20% skinning over and going to waste. So I think that's probably as much as I can say right now, but if you're still here and listening to this, I want you to be the first to hear it. So I'm going to put a link in the description. It says secret finish. And if this is something that you're interested in, click on that link, sign up, and you're going to be the first to hear about it. And as a special thank you, after you've signed up, you'll get an email with a limited time special bonus from me. Okay, more coming hopefully very soon. As I put the finishing touches on this one, I want to quickly say thank you for choosing to spend your time watching this video. Because I'll be honest, this one felt like a little bit of a gamble. What I mean is, when I compare this piece to other things that I've built and designed this past year, it's probably the most subtle and boring of the bunch. But that was kind of the point of this video. I wanted to talk about design and show a different side of myself than I have been lately. And the fact that you're willing to take a chance on something that's a little different means a ton to me. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not changing. I'm still a sucker for extreme angles and flowing lines. But hopefully this one will give a few of you out there a different kind of creative spark. And hopefully you'll believe me when I say, with the right touch, even something that starts off a little boring can be made beautiful. See you in the next one.